All right, my name is Hunter, and this is week 8 of the Principles of Biology content review. Today we're doing Populations Part 2 and Community Ecology. Our first set of questions, we're given a scenario here with salamanders and their parasites. So a researcher has recently discovered 3 species of parasites that infect developing salamanders. He suspects that one or more of these species causes fatalities during salamander development. To test his hypothesis, the researcher sets up a series of experiments. In each experiment, he varies the density of the salamander populations, and he infects 2% of each test population at the start of the experiment and measures the mortality rate after 4 weeks. To establish a baseline mortality rate, he sets up a control experiment that differs only in that no parasite was introduced at any density. The data table and graph below relate the mortality rate of salamanders caused by the 3 different parasites to the original density of the developing salamander population. So we have density of salamander population and mortality rate. These are going to be our 2 big variables, and you can see those laid out in the chart. So the first thing that I do anytime I'm approached with a prompt like this is to orient myself to the charts. See what I've got here. We have density A and death rate A, density B and death rate B, etc. But you'll notice that the densities are all identical. So this could just as easily be a chart with population density on on the far left column and then death rates for each of the parasites, it looks like. And then, yeah, so that's what's reflected in this chart that we have below. So this is probably what I'm going to look at more, since it displays the information in a way that's a little bit more graphically intuitive for me. If I have to reference any raw numbers, then we'll come back up to that table. All right, so that's the information that we need. What's our first question? Given the data presented in the graph, indicate whether each of the parasite species is acting in a density-dependent or density-independent fashion, and explain your answers. And we had how many parasites? We had A through D, and let's orient ourselves to this chart again. So we have, looks like parasite A, B, C, and D was our control group. So the solid line with the round spots appears to be this one here at the bottom. So that's if no parasites are introduced. So let's take a look at A, the solid line with the diamonds. And it looks like as salamander density increases, so does the mortality rate. So density, population per unit area, and mortality rate, deaths per population, per unit population. So what this is telling us is that for parasite A, parasite A is clearly acting in a density-dependent fashion. As density increases, the mortality rate increases. Density-dependent fashion, because it causes progressively higher mortality rates as salamander density increases. All right, so let's take a look at parasite B. Parasite B is the dotted line up here. So parasite B has a really high mortality rate relative to the others, but it doesn't appear to change as our salamander density changes. So what that tells us is that it's density independent. We can go ahead and say that. Parasite B is density independent, even though it has a greater mortality rate than the control. Yeah, it's fairly consistent across population densities, and as a result, it's acting in a density-independent fashion. All right, so parasite C. This is our last one besides the control. So parasite C then is this one with squares, And it looks like we have a little dip, and then it rises again, and it gets back to its normal at the lower density. So this one also appears to be density independent to my eye. Yeah, is density independent, though it also produces greater mortality than the control. And then parasite C, line D, excuse me, is the control. And this shows about 10% mortality across population densities. So we can say that there isn't, this control is really important because it's telling us that there isn't any other, what can I say? The number of deaths occurring at each population density cannot be attributed to a parasite, and there are no other factors acting on the population related to density that might skew our results. So this line is really important here. All right. Question B. After looking at the data for parasites A and B, develop an argument to indicate which is more likely to cause extinction of the salamander population and explain your reasoning. Which of the parasites? It doesn't say this in the question, but I suppose we can kind of infer that it's asking about which of the parasites is most likely to cause salamander extinction. So we could argue that as the population increases, parasite A is going to kill more and more, have a higher and higher mortality rate, approaching 90% once we get to, what does this number even mean? 320 salamanders per unit area, I guess? Unclear. It just says density. So we could argue that if the parasite, or excuse me, if parasite A is the main parasite in this population, as the population gets bigger, mortality rate will increase. But then as that population starts to shrink again, the mortality rate will shrink because that parasite acts in a density-dependent fashion. And so it probably would not lead to extinction of the species unless it hits some like critical threshold, which isn't a topic of isn't something we've measured in this particular experiment. So parasite B, by contrast, has this really high mortality rate, around 80%, regardless of the population density, and this could, especially in a smaller population, lead to an extinction event. So because of the overall high mortality rate of parasite B at all population densities, it could decrease the population size such that it cannot rebound. Yep, and in contrast, parasite A has that lower mortality rate at lower population densities, and so we're more likely to see oscillations in population size and related to parasite mortality over time. All right. What models can you use to calculate how quickly a population can grow? In the simplest population growth model, delta n over delta t equals R max times n. What do these terms stand for? So delta n is our change in the number of individuals. This is the change in the entire population. Delta t is the time interval, unit time, during which the change occurs. R max is the per capita population growth rate. Per capita population growth rate. This is sometimes referred to as the variable b, which will become important later. And then capital N, this is our initial population size. So we have the change in the number of individuals. If you can see my cursor here, I hope you can. Oh geez. Delta n, the change in the number of individuals divided by the unit time that that change occurred in, is equal to the per capita population growth rate times the initial population size. All right. What type of population growth does this equation describe? This formula describes exponential growth of a population, and this will look like a J-shaped curve. Come on. And this is significant because I'm going to do my little chart here. Even though our population is increasing at an exponential rate, early on it doesn't appear to be that much change, but then later, of course, it becomes much more dramatic. So what assumptions are made to develop this equation? We are assuming that we have unlimited space, or habitat, and resources. There's nothing in this formula about carrying capacity, about death rates, about other factors that would limit growth. Assuming unlimited space and unlimited resources, this population will continue to grow into infinity. All right, so population growth may also be represented by the model delta n, so we've got change in number of individuals again over unit time, equals R max, again that's our per capita population growth rate, times n, the initial population size, times, I think this is times, yep, k minus n, that quantity divided by k. What is k? I kind of gave it away a moment ago, but k is the carrying capacity, or the number of individuals that can be sustained over time. And k is a function of the environment. So if n equals k, if n is the initial population size equals k, the carrying capacity, then what is delta n, the change in the number of individuals over the time interval? If delta n over delta t equals 0, there's no change in the population size over time, right? If we're at carrying capacity, if we are at the limit of what the environment can support, there can be no growth. And so the change in the number of individuals couldn't be positive. It would have to be 0. When n equals k, I'm going to annotate this delta n, dn, just because it's, yeah. Little d instead of delta. Delta n over delta t equals 0, then no change in the population size over time. All right, describe in words how delta n, change in population size, over delta t, unit time, changes from when n is very small, the initial population is very small, to when n is large relative to k. All right, so we're looking at our equation here. We've got a large initial population or a very small initial population. So when n is very small, our population is growing exponentially. The actual numbers of new individuals added is relatively small. relatively small. However, because n is so small, no, other way around. Yeah, when n is very small, the population is growing exponentially, and the number of new individuals added is relatively small, however. As n approaches the value of half the carrying capacity, right? As n nears the value k over 2, half the carrying capacity, delta n over delta t approaches its maximum. Okay. So the number of new individuals that we're adding per unit time approaches its maximum at around half the carrying capacity of the environment. This is important. As n approaches k, the delta n over delta t increases. So as n approaches k, the carrying capacity delta n over delta t, decreases. I said that backwards. Decreases. All right, so J-shaped growth curve, right? Early in the growth curve, a few small absolute number of individuals are being added. There's not a ton of pressure on the environment yet. As we approach half the carrying capacity, that growth rate, that change in the number of individuals in the population per unit time is hitting its maximum. And then as n approaches k, its carrying capacity is going to level off again. And that delta n over delta t decreases again, approaching 0. All right. What assumptions are made to develop this equation? So in the previous one, we were assuming unlimited space and resources. What are the assumptions we're making in this particular formula? This is called the logistic model. The logistic model assumes that resources and space limit the growth of a population, and that these factors determine the maximum number of individuals that can be sustained over time. So the logistic model assumes that resources and space limit the growth of a population, and that these factors determine the maximum number of individuals that can be sustained over time. Cool. A lot of this research happens on islands because it is pretty straightforward to survey an entire population and determine what the carrying capacity is of that environment pretty readily. And then scientists often extrapolate based on that how many individuals can be supported per unit area. But they're nice little containers. All right, so question 3. You and your friends have monitored 2 populations, population A and B, of wild lupine, beautiful flowers, for 1 entire growing season, June year 1 to June year 2. By carefully mapping, tagging, and censusing the plants throughout this period, you obtain the data listed in the chart. All right, so we've got population A, we have initial number of plants, that's our N. I'm just going to write that here. N value, with number of new seedlings established. And that would be our, what did I call this? B. That's not our per capita population growth rate, excuse me. That's the change in the number of individuals. So that's our delta N. And number of the initial plants that have died. So we don't have a mortality rate in either of these calculations. So we might have to do some new math there, if I had to guess. Number of the initial plants that died. All right. Calculate the following parameters for each population. We have B, the number of births, D, the number of deaths, and then we have little b, little d, and R max. So R max is familiar. This is the change in populations, per capita change in population, right? Yep, per capita population growth rate. And I'm wondering if that's what this little b is, but I'm not certain about that just yet. So let's dive a little bit deeper here. All right, number of births, raw number of births. Population 1, we have number of new seedlings established, 100 out of 500. We have number of initial plants that died. So this is pretty simple. That looks like 100 to me. We have the number of deaths. Number of deaths appears to be 20. And then this is where I'm a little unclear. I don't know if this is just rehashing the same variables. Is this death rate? I'm not clear on what that's supposed to be perfectly honest, and I've got an answer key right here, and I'm not totally sure how to interpret these answers. So we're gonna do our best here. Whoa. All right. Population B. Number of births. We have 30 seedlings established. I'm gonna go with that. And we have number of deaths. We have around 100, it looks like. And then we have these kind of mystery B's and D's. So if I had to guess, we've got 100 births per 500 initial plants. All right, well, let's find our equation again. This is where I'm just... yeah. Well, first let's decide which of the formulas we need to use. We don't have a sense that there's a carrying capacity in here. There's nothing in here really. We don't have enough data to really tell us that. So we could probably work with a simplified model here. Yeah. All right. So we're going to use delta n over delta t equals R max times n. So let's see if we can suss this out. So our change in the number of individuals. Hang on 1 second. This is one of those occasions where normally I would have a little bit more prep done before doing the live stream, but life being what it is, we don't always have that option. So I am seeing this with y'all for the first time today. All right. Give my other unit here a second to catch up. All right. We've got, come on now. There we go. All right, we're about to find out how quickly these screens refresh. Delta n, delta t equals R max times n. So for population A, we'll do this up here. We said that our delta n was 100. Our unit time is 1 year, so we're just going to leave that. equals R max. So the per capita change in N is going to be, we added 100, we subtracted 20. Per 500. And that's our R max. Times N was 500. Let's see if I did this right. Divided by 500 times 500. Something's wrong. Oh, we're just calculating R max right now. That's not quite right though. That would be right. Okay. So the way they're doing this is they just have 100 divided by 500 times 500. We can simplify and get rid of all of these zeros and just confirm that 100 does in fact equal 100. So our R max equals 100, apparently. That can't be. Sorry, R max equals 1/5. Does that make sense? I think so. Y'all get to check me on this because I don't actually have an answer key to work off of today. Check my work. All right. That's what I'm working with. We could also write that as 0.2. Right? All right, so let's try the same thing with population B. We've got, our change was 30 per 1 year. That's our delta T over delta N over delta T equals R max times 300, right? And if I had to guess, R max is going to be, tablet's about to die, I think. Cool. Well, yep. Yeah, 30 divided by 300 times 300 does in fact equal 30. And so our R max is going to be 0.1. I think I've got that right. Cool. Given the initial population size and assuming the population is experiencing exponential growth at growth rate R, what will the number of plants be in each population in 5 years? Use the initial population size as time 0 and compute to time 5. So I have an answer here, and I'm going to see if we can get there. I'm just going to type this out. This is what's in my answer key. But it's, and let's see, over here, we've got 81. So if you have already done this problem on your own, these are the answers that I was given. If you got it right, fantastic. If not, let's see if we can work through it together. All right. So now we're looking at 5 years. Use the initial population size as times, use the initial population size as time 0 and compute to time 5. Okay, so we're starting with, we're starting with 500 for population A. Just write that off in the margin. And then we are going to increase by 100. I'm suspicious. I don't think this is actually right. And I hesitate to lead y'all astray. And I don't have a good way to check my work here. But we're going to try. We're going to try. 100 divided by, we want 5 years. Gives us 20. This is going to be our R max. We've got 0.2 times the initial population is 500. So 500. That's not how that works. I'm overthinking this. Given the initial population size and assuming the population is experiencing exponential growth at growth rate R, what will the number of plants be in each population in 5 years? R max we said was 0.2. Hang on just a second, y'all. Something about this isn't sitting right, and so I'm trying to find another resource to make this make sense. Okay. I'm relieved to read in the chat that someone is getting similar values, but I'm also not convinced that something is wrong. Part of the trouble here is in my answer key, the way that these tables are formatting is removing a lot of content, and so I can't actually see what it says. And so I'm just trying to find another representation of this formula somewhere online to make sure that it isn't also a formatting error on the worksheet. No. Delta n over delta t equals Rn. Yeah. R is a constant per individual. Yeah. Great. Fantastic. the per capita birth rate minus the death rate R is constant per individual. So in our formula, we were meant to I was right the first time. Was I right the first time? So that wasn't delta N. But when I went back here the first time, I wanted to do the change in individuals was 100 births minus 20 deaths, which I think is still correct over, what did I say, the initial population or the total population? I still think that's right. Because we had 500 individuals in the first place. I think this is right. Times 500N. I still think that's right. So 100 minus 20 divided by 500 times 500, same, be 80. So delta N over delta T equals 80. Yeah, that checks out. So R max then is 80 over 500. 0.16. Yeah, I feel better about this. Let's try it for population B. We've got, this is in 1 year. Yeah. Well, we'll get a number, negative number here, so that's fine. 30 minus 100 over our initial population was 300 times 300. That's fine. Yeah, that can't possibly be right. So negative 70 divided by 300 would be negative 0.233. Which would be a pretty dramatic decrease in population. Okay. That seems to make sense. Yeah, we had an initial population of 300. So even with the answer key that we were given, 81 seems like a much more plausible number given a negative growth rate. That seems to make more sense. All right, so knowing that, how do we use this formula to figure out the population in 5 years? Let me wrap my head around that for a second. And while I'm thinking about it, I'm going to find my power cord. It seems like it should be fairly straightforward. All right, we're back in business. So let's see. Given the initial population size and assuming the population is experiencing exponential growth at growth rate r, we have our growth rates. What will the number of plants be in each population in 5 years? So there's a longhand way to do this, and I don't think I want to do it that way, where we take our initial population of, what was it, 500, we subtract 80, figure out what that number is, multiply by this number, subtract that sum 5 times. And I just feel like that's a terrible way to do it. There's 2 years, 3 years. 4 years. There has to be a better way. Except we're adding. Got population B on the brain, except we're adding. 580 times 0.16. All right. 580 plus that sum. There's 3 years. After 3 years would be 672.8. These are not whole numbers, but that's fine. So after 4 years, this is definitely the worst way in the world to do it, but we're gonna get there. Times 0.16, cool. Plus 672.8, cool. I just want to make sure that I get an answer that looks something like 1050, and I have a feeling that it's gonna work. Nope. Oh, I bet I'm a year off. I'm a year off. That was after 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, sure enough, is 1050. So that's a very, very longhand way to do it. I don't know if I explained that clearly enough while I was doing it. I basically took 500. We figured out what our growth rate was. That was 0.16. So I did 500 plus the quantity, 500 times 0.16, and that equaled, so that's year 0. Year 1 was that sum, which was 580. And then year 2 was 580 plus the sum of 580 times 0.16, etc. Which is a slow way to do it, and it worked. And I need someone, I need an adult. I need someone who's better at this than I am to teach you all a smarter way to do that. So using the exponential growth formula, you can determine the amount of time it will take for a population to double in size if you know what Rmax or R. The doubling time is equal to log base 10 2 over log base 10 1 plus R. Alternatively, this value can be estimated by using, I love estimating, by using the formula 70 divided by, by the percent increase per unit time as a whole number equals doubling time per unit time, or 70 divided by R equals approximate doubling time. Whew! Let's see this in action using either of these formulas, the exponential growth formula or the approximate doubling rate formula. Calculate the following. Here we go. If the population of a country is growing at 2% per year, how many years will it take for the population to double? All right, we've got doubling time. Equals, we've got 70 from our formula above, divided by the rate as a whole number, divided by 2% per year, equals, well, 70 divided by 2 would be 35 years. So if the population of a country is growing at 2% per year, it'll take approximately 35 years for that population to double. Love that. Love that little shorthand. Here's a use case that we might encounter more often. If your bank account is growing at a rate of 1% per year, which is a high-interest checking account if you're banking online, how many years will it take for your money to double? Doubling time. Equals approximately 70 divided by 1% per year equals about 70 years. This is an estimate. All right, moving on. You're studying the growth of a particular strain of bacteria. You begin with a tiny colony on a petri plate. One day later, you determine that the colony grew and exactly doubled in size. A calculation showed that if the colony continued to grow at the same constant rate, it would cover the entire plate in 30 days. Assume that the colony size is directly proportional to the number of individual bacteria. What is the value of R? All right. So if we know R, then we can count the doubling. We can calculate the doubling time backwards, right? This value, again, can be estimated by 70 divided by the percent increase per unit time as a whole number equals the doubling time per unit time. So therefore, if 70 divided by R equals 1 day, then R must equal approximately 70%. 70% or 0.7. On what day would the bacteria cover half the plate? So if the bacteria colony doubles in size every day and completely covers the plate on day 30, it doubles every day. If it covers the entire plate on day 30, which we've got from up here, then it was half that size on day 29. So it's day 29. It's got to be. I can type that. If the bacteria colony doubles in size every day and completely covers it in 30 days, then it covered half the plate in 29 days. Then it must cover half the plate on day 29. Cool. Moving right along, we've got 10 minutes. You collect data on birth and mortality in 3 populations of grasshoppers and calculate the following birth and death rates for these populations. Both populations are experiencing exponential growth. Ow! That's what B and D was up here. This is the birth rate, this is the death rate. That would have simplified things considerably. Are the following statements true or false? Population A is growing at the fastest rate. We've got birth and death. So we have a growth rate of 90 minus 80 is about 10%. B is 45 minus 35 is about 10%. Population C is 15 minus 5 would be about 10%. So that was false. That one's a big fat F. False. Population C has the lowest death rate. D, we have 80, 35, 5. That is true. C does have the lowest death rate. Population C is growing at the slowest rate. That is false. They all appear to be growing at the same rate since we have 10, 10, and 10%. They're all growing at the same rate. They just have vastly different birth and death rates. And finally, all populations are growing at the same rate. That is true. That is true. All right, in a herd of bison, the number of calves born in 92, 93, 94 was 55, 80, and 70 respectively. In which year was the birth rate the greatest? The number of calves born was 55, 80, and 70 respectively. In which year was the birth rate the greatest? Well, unfortunately, we simply don't have enough information to answer this question, right? Because we don't have this value. We don't know what the initial population was. We don't know because we don't know the total population size for each of those years. We also don't know the death rate. Population of pigeons. It's weirdly split between two pages. On the west side of town has a per capita annual growth rate of 0.07, so 7%. A separate population of pigeons on the east side of town has a per capita annual growth rate of 10%. If the populations are both growing exponentially and both are censused the following year, in which of the populations will delta n over delta t be greatest? And again, we can't answer this question because we don't know how long the initial populations are. If the two population sizes are equal, we should write that. We don't know because we don't know how large the populations are initially. If the two population sizes are equal, or if the population on the east side is larger than the population on the west side, then your delta n over delta t would be greater on the east side. However, if the population on the west side is large, the population on the east side is much smaller, then your delta n, your change in the number of individuals divided by the change in time, or the west side population, would be the greater of the two. So it really depends. A rabbit population has the life table shown here. So we have age group, number of survivors, number of deaths, mortality rate, and the number of offspring per reproducing pair. So number of offspring per 2 individuals. Okay? Fill in the missing data on the table. Cool. We've got survivors, deaths, mortality rate, and offspring per year. How do we want to tackle this? Let's see. Oh, we've got a mortality rate. Yeah, that should work. Let me make sure that makes sense. Nope. Dog barking in the background. Sorry, everybody. 1 second. hopefully as I'm writing this down, this makes sense here. So we were given a mortality rate, and we had the number of survivors that we were starting off with. So number of survivors was 90 times the mortality rate, 0.33, gave us 30 individuals. All right, so a third of them died. We have 60 survivors in this cohort. 30 of them died, that's half. So a 50% mortality rate. We have 30 survivors, 24 deaths. 24 out of 30 is, sure enough, 80%. And then we have 6 deaths with a mortality rate of 1, meaning 100%. So we had 6 survivors and no pairs reproducing. All right. Owing to a good food supply and a small predator population, the rabbit population is growing by leaps and bounds, but the rabbits call a meeting to discuss population control measures. This conversation never goes well. 2 strategies are proposed. Delay all rabbit marriages until age class 2 to 3. Rabbits never breed until after marriage. Very, very Puritan rabbits. Or sterilize all rabbits in age class 3 to 4. All right. Which of the proposed strategies will be more effective in slowing population growth, and explain your reasoning, show your calculations. All right. So delay all rabbit marriages to class 2 and 3. Let's take a look at number of offspring per reproducing pair, right? This is the element of concern, I suppose. So in the first 2 years of their lives, each reproducing pair of rabbits will have an average of 1.5 offspring, right? For a cohort of 100 rabbits born in years 0 and 1, that would be 90 or 45 pairs of rabbits will each have 1.5 offspring during year 1 and 2. So they'll add about 67.5 rabbits to the population. When the same cohort reaches class 3 and 4, it will consist of 30 rabbits or 15 pairs, each of which will produce an average of 2.5 offspring for a total of 37.5 rabbits. Therefore, the population size will be more limited by delaying rabbit marriages until age class 2 or 3. So I'm just gonna put a little star and a little sad face here. If we sterilized all rabbits in age class 3 and 4, yes, we have the highest number of offspring per reproducing pair for that age cohort, but that doesn't end up being as many rabbits as would be produced in these younger cohorts combined. All right. That puts us just about at time. I can stick around for a bit. If you need to go, totally fine. Submit your worksheet. Good faith effort gets full points. I'm going to struggle through this for a little bit longer. And yeah, with that, logistic population growth in fisheries. Suppose you have a farm on which you grow, harvest, and sell edible freshwater fish. The growth of the fish population is logistic. You want to manage your harvest to maintain maximum yields. That is the maximum rate of production from your farm over a number of years. As a fisheries manager, you are responsible for deciding how many walleye can be harvested. Oh, walleye are so tasty. Without destabilizing the population. Below is a data table showing the walleye population in a typical pond in your fish farm over 24 weeks. Draw a graph showing how population size in the pond changes over time. It appears that they've already drawn a graph. Have they not? Week 1, we've got 100. Yep, 101. 100. Let's see. Week 9, do we have a decent jump to 125? Yep. Week 13, it looks like we're at 188. Yep. Okay, so we don't need to draw anything. This has already been done. Fantastic. Love that. How large should you let the population get before you harvest? Identify the point on your graph and explain why this is the best size for harvest. So our rate of production will be fastest. Remember when we were talking about carrying capacity? At the point of the curve where the slope is steepest, which is going to be right about there. Point C. This is the midpoint of our graph. Note our change in delta n. Come on. Come on now. Wake up. Oh, it's not going to do it. Our change in the number of individuals per unit time is the measure of the rate of change, that is production of individuals in the population. When we graph n versus t, the slope corresponds to delta n over delta t. When our population approaches half of the carrying capacity, that change in the number of individuals is at its greatest, right? So our carrying capacity is around 250, it looks like. Half that, 175, is when that growth is fastest, right? Our growth curve is not yet leveling out. So point C, around 12 weeks. The population is growing fastest, is growing the fastest, and is at half its carrying capacity. All right. Assume the carrying capacity for your pond is 250 individuals. That makes sense given the chart. Check your answer in part B by using the data in the chart and computing the change in population size when the population is at several different levels relative to its carrying capacity. Use K equals 250. Okay. And R max equals 0.2. All right, and we're given carrying capacity 250. All right, we'll start with this first one. We're given 250 minus 25 divided by 250. 200 minus 25. 250 minus 25 divided by 250 gives us 0.9. And we have delta n. Let me move this over. Over delta t. Why do I have such a different number? Than my answer key. Why? Yeah, that's definitely just a typo. Yeah. Cool. well, 0 divided by 250 is 0. Cool. Okay. Then we've got our change in individuals per unit time. Easy peasy. Check your answer in part B by using the data in the chart and computing the change of the population side. Okay. Let's go back here. So we had population of, let's take 125. And we had a rate of 0.5. So that, yeah, so 1 over 2. That appears to be a slope of 1 over 2 to me. We'll see. Okay. R max of 0.2. Alrighty. Let me scroll back up to the top here and just copy down our formula. Sorry if I'm making y'all dizzy here. Here we go. Delta N over delta T equals R max times N times the quantity K minus N divided by K. All right. Okay, so we're simply taking this number and multiplying it times R max times N. So our R max at a population of 25 for all of these is 0.2 times 25 times that value we calculated before. 0.2 times 25 times 0.9 equals 4.5, which I'm pretty sure that's right. All right, let's try the next one. 0.2 times 50 times 0.8 gives us 8, and that lines up. 0.2, we've got 125 as our next one, and we calculated at 0.5. 0.2, 125, 0.5 gives us 12.5. 200 is our next one, and we had 0.2, 0.2, 0.2, 200 gives us 8, and 0. All right. And just for a sanity check here, we have increasing changes in the number of individuals, peaking around 125, and then decreasing again. Does that line up with our chart? Yeah. Yep. Our rate was greatest, increasing at the greatest rate here between B and C, and then it drops off again. And B and C was 175. We don't have a lot of values between 125 and 200, so but that makes sense. Yep. Yep, that makes sense. Anything after 170, it should be decreasing again. So that tracks. Cool. All right, y'all. That is all I have time for. Have a great weekend. Good luck with your exams if you still have any.